Heavy raindrops drummed against the windows, creating an ominous rhythm in the darkness of the apartment. Latoya Delacroix sat on the edge of her bed, draped in a silk robe the color of burgundy wine. Her dark fingers, with their impeccable manicure and heavy gold ruby ring, tapped nervously on her hip. 65 years reflected in every wrinkle of her face, but years of experience gave her a nobility and stature that even anxiety and tension could not hide. Darius Washington emerged from the bathroom, dressed only in dark slacks, with drops of water on his muscular torso. 25 years old. The age difference was so obvious it became almost grotesque, but something in his eyes, something dark and deep, made her forget that those eyes were looking at her now with a smile that promised everything Latoya had already dreamed of for the past 10 years of loneliness. "You look worried, Latoya." His voice was low, with a huskiness that resonated somewhere deep inside her. "There's a hearing on your case tomorrow, Darius. I can't just put it out of my mind." She turned away, staring at the rain outside the window. "What we're doing, it's wrong." Darius came up behind her, placing his hands on her shoulders. She felt the warmth of his fingers even through the fabric of her robe. "What is between us is the only real thing in this rotten world," he whispered. "I'm innocent, and you know it. You're the only one who can prove it." Latoya closed her eyes. Yes, the case file was ambiguous. Armed robbery of a small store on Chicago's South Side witness testimony was contradictory. The surveillance footage was grainy, the robber's face blurry. Darius claimed he was across town visiting his sick mother. No one could confirm it. The first time she'd seen him had been 2 months ago, when the case had come to her courtroom. Something about his proud posture, the way he held himself in the courtroom, had caught her attention. At the third hearing, their gazes met, and Latoya felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time: electricity, attraction, forbidden desire. She didn't know then that the feeling would lead her to disaster. "I need to review the case files." Latoya rose, pulling away from his touch. "I can't afford to look biased tomorrow." "You worry too much." Darius shrugged and collapsed onto the bed, spreading his arms. "No one will suspect a thing. I mean, you're the Iron Lady of Delacroix, the Cook County Supreme Court thug. You're respected. You're feared. Respect is a privilege. It can be lost in an instant." She looked at him sternly. 30 years of a flawless career can crumble because of one mistake. Is love a mistake? He raised an eyebrow, smiling the same smile that always disarmed her. Latoya turned away, walking to the window. Besides age, everything separated them: education, status, background. She was the daughter of a literature professor and a doctor, raised in a privileged Chicago neighborhood, a graduate of Yale Law School. He, raised in Englewood, one of the city's most dangerous neighborhoods, fatherless, with a mother who worked 3 jobs. Their worlds should never have crossed, but they did cross, in her courtroom. The first time it happened was after the 5th session. Darius spied her in the courthouse parking lot in the twilight of a fall evening. "Your Honor, may I speak with you?" His voice was different, not brash like in the courtroom, but almost pleading. "Mr. Washington, you know you're not supposed to have contact with me outside of the courtroom." She gripped the file folder tighter. 5 minutes. I know you're hesitant. I can see it in your eyes. You're the only one who's really trying to understand." Something in his gaze made her stop. 5 minutes. At the cafe across the street. 5 minutes turned into an hour. An hour turned into dinner at a small Italian restaurant on the other side of town where no one knew them. After dinner, on an impulse that she couldn't explain even to herself, she offered to continue the conversation at her house. What began as a conversation ended in her bedroom. In the morning, she woke up with a feeling of deep shame and an overwhelming desire to repeat everything again. Thus began their secret liaison, meetings in her Gold Coast apartment overlooking Lake Michigan. Each time she promised herself it would be the last time. Each time she broke the promise. "What are you thinking about?" Darius's voice brought her back to the present. "About how this whole thing started." She turned to him. "And about how it must end." "It will end with my acquittal." He rose from the bed and walked over to her. "And then we can be together. Openly." Latoya grinned bitterly. "Darius, be realistic. I'm 40 years older than you. I'm a judge. I'm a what? A criminal? But you yourself believe I'm innocent. I don't know what I believe more, she whispered. In truth, Latoya wasn't sure of anything. At her 65, she thought she had already lived her life. Her husband had died 10 years ago. The children had grown up and moved to other cities. Her grandchildren visited her twice a year. Work was her only solace, until she met Darius. His touch made her feel desirable. His gaze awakened feelings long forgotten in her. He told her things she wanted to hear, that age didn't matter, that she was beautiful, that he had never met a woman like her. She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that a young, handsome man could really be attracted to a woman her age, wanted to believe that he was innocent, that the system she dedicated her life to could have been wrong in his case. I have to go. Darius began to dress. My lawyer wants to go over the depositions one more time before the hearing tomorrow. Latoya nodded, feeling both relieved and regretful at the same time. I'll be objective tomorrow, Darius. I can't just dismiss the evidence. I know. He reached over and kissed her. I believe in you, Latoya, and in us. When the door closed behind him, Latoya sat on the edge of the bed and covered her face with her hands. Outside the window, the rain intensified, as if the sky was mourning her moral downfall. Latoya sat in the expensive Blue Star restaurant on the 47th floor of a skyscraper in downtown Chicago. Through the large panoramic windows, she had a view of Lake Michigan merging with the gray October sky. She tapped her fingernail nervously on her glass mineral water glass, glancing at her watch. Chanel was 15 minutes late, which was unusual for her. Latoya and Chanel Fremont had been friends for 30 years. They met at the Chicago Bar Association when both were just starting their careers. Since then, their friendship has gone through many trials, the ups and downs of their careers, Chanel's marriage and divorce, and the death of Latoya's husband. Chanel was the only person Latoya could trust unconditionally. Sorry I'm late, Chanel appeared unexpectedly, attracting the attention of half the restaurant. In her 62 years, she remained a vibrant and charismatic woman with a mop of gray hair arranged in an elegant style. This new client is completely inept at finishing appointments on time. Latoya stood up to hug her friend. Chanel smelled of expensive perfume and the cigarettes she'd tried unsuccessfully to quit for the past 20 years. You look terrible, Chanel stated blandly, looking Latoya over carefully. What's wrong? The last time I saw you like this was when you were handling the Jackson case. The Jackson case had been the most difficult of Latoya's career, a serial killer trial that had lasted 6 months and ended in a death sentence. Latoya didn't sleep for weeks at the time. I need to talk to you, Latoya said quietly, looking around to make sure no one was overhearing them. I've made a terrible mistake, Chanel. Chanel frowned, making a sign to the waiter. Double scotch, please. She turned to Latoya. From the looks of you, this is serious. Latoya took a deep breath. She'd rehearsed this conversation all evening, but now that the moment had arrived, the words stuck in her throat. I'm sleeping with the defendant, she finally squeezed out. The Washington case. Chanel froze with the glass in her hand before it reached her lips. Her eyes widened with shock. You what? I know it sounds crazy, Latoya spoke quickly, afraid if she stopped, she wouldn't be able to continue. I didn't plan this. It just happened. Chanel slowly set her glass down on the table, her hands shaking slightly. Latoya, do you realize what you've done? You're a judge, for God's sake. This isn't just a breach of professional ethics, it's a crime, I know, Latoya interrupted her. I could lose everything. My position, my pension, my reputation. I could even go to jail. Not to mention jeopardizing your entire case. Chanel shook her head. If this gets out, Washington could appeal, even if he's found guilty. You're giving him carte blanche to go free. I think he's innocent, Latoya said quietly. Chanel snorted, sipping her scotch. Of course you think that. You're sleeping with him. Latoya, wake up. That boy is half your age. He's using you. You don't know him. Latoya felt anger rising inside. He's not what you think he is. Do you know? Chanel leaned closer. How long have you two been together? A month? 2? Have you checked his history? Do you know he's not lying to you? Latoya looked away. She hadn't checked. She believed Darius when he told her about his childhood, about his sick mother, about his struggle to get an education, believed him when he said he was in the wrong place at the wrong time and that he'd been framed. "I'm a judge, Chanel. I know how to judge people." "You're a woman, Latoya. A woman in love. It blinds even the best of us." Chanel took another sip of scotch, looking at her friend with a mixture of pity and concern. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know," Latoya answered honestly. "I have to stop this, but I can't." "You have to recuse yourself," Chanel said firmly. "Chalk it up to a conflict of interest, personal circumstances, whatever. But you can't continue to prosecute this case." "If I recuse myself now, it will raise suspicion," Latoya objected. "The case is already out in the open. Everyone will wonder why I'm suddenly recusing myself from it." "Better suspicion than scandal," Chanel shook her head. "Latoya, please think about your career, about your reputation." Latoya knew her friend was right, but something inside her resisted. The thought of not seeing Darius again was unbearable. "I can't just leave him," she whispered. "You can't even hear yourself." Chanel took her hand. "Look at me. This isn't just an affair, Latoya. This could ruin your life. You're risking everything for a boy you barely know." Latoya wrenched her hand away. "I didn't ask you to judge me, Chanel. I asked for advice. And I'm giving it to you." Chanel looked concerned. "Stop this before it's too late." Latoya was silent, looking out the window at the gray sky over Chicago. Chanel sighed, finishing her scotch. "I love you, Latoya. You're my best friend. I don't want you to get hurt." "I know," Latoya smiled weakly. "Thank you for listening." But in the back of her mind, she already knew she wouldn't follow her friend's advice. Not now. Not when Darius had become the only thing that made her feel alive. That evening, Latoya sat in her office reviewing Washington's case file. Crime scene photos, witness statements, expert reports, all of it lay before her, demanding the attention of a professional, not a woman in love. A knock on the door made her flinch. "Come in!" She instinctively adjusted her glasses, as if that might hide her guilt. Marcus Taylor, the district attorney prosecuting the case against Darius, appeared in the doorway. A tall, trim man with short-cropped graying hair and shrewd eyes behind thin-rimmed glasses. "Judge Delacroix, you're up late tonight." He smiled as he entered the office. "I wanted to leave you with these documents, new evidence in the Washington case." Latoya tensed, but kept a nonchalant expression on her face. "What kind of evidence exactly, Mr. Taylor?" "We've received the DNA results from the crime scene." Marcus placed a folder on the table. "And another witness is willing to testify. He claims he saw Washington near the store 15 minutes before the robbery." Latoya felt her heart race. She slowly opened the folder, trying to keep her hands from shaking. "Are you sure of the reliability of this witness?" "He's a member of the community, a respected man." Marcus looked at her with mild surprise. "No reason to lie. Witness testimony isn't always reliable, Mr. Taylor." Latoya held his gaze. "People can make mistakes." "Of course, Your Honor." Marcus nodded. "But when combined with the other evidence, it makes for a pretty convincing picture." Latoya was silent. Leafing through the documents, indeed, the new evidence looked convincing. The DNA trace on the store counter matched Darius's profile. A witness was willing to swear he'd seen him near the crime scene at the time Darius said he was on the other side of town. "Is something wrong, Your Honor?" Marcus Taylor watched her curiously. "No, nothing's wrong." Latoya closed the folder. "Just tired. Long day." "You don't seem particularly impartial in this case," Marcus remarked cautiously. Latoya flinched, but quickly pulled herself together. "What do you mean, Mr. Taylor?" "At the last meeting, you asked the defense some leading questions." Marcus shrugged. "That's not like you, Your Honor. You're usually ruthless on both sides." "I just want to make sure justice is served," Latoya smiled dryly. "And to do that, you need to consider all sides of the case." "Of course," Marcus nodded, but there was still doubt in his eyes. "I just wanted to make sure you were okay." "I'm fine, Mr. Taylor. Thank you for your concern." When Marcus left, Latoya leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes. She realized she was starting to lose control of the situation. If even Marcus Taylor noticed her bias, others might notice it too. She had to be more careful. Should have remembered who she was and what was at stake. But when her phone vibrated and she saw a message from Darius, "Miss you, see you tonight?" All her decisions crumbled like a house of cards. It was 3 in the morning when Latoya woke up thirsty, Darius sleeping peacefully beside her, his naked body only half covered by a silk sheet. Moonlight streamed through the loose curtains, painting silvery streaks across the dark skin of his back. She got out of bed carefully, trying not to wake him. Putting on her robe, Latoya went to the kitchen. The old parquet creaked under her feet, but Darius didn't move. He always slept soundly, like a child, Latoya thought, pouring herself cold water from the carafe. Sip by sip, she stared out the kitchen window at the dimly lit street. The snow that had fallen the day before covered the sidewalks and cars in a thin layer, making winter Chicago look like a Christmas card. Darius's cell phone rang. Latoya flinched in surprise. Who could be calling at 3 in the morning? Nay. In the hallway, she heard Darius's voice. He was awake. Latoya froze, listening. He spoke softly, but in the silence of the night, the words were clearly audible. "I told you not to call that number." His voice sounded irritated. "She might see." A pause. Latoya stood motionless, out of breath. "I know what I'm doing. Don't worry. Everything is going according to plan. It's in my pocket." Another pause. Latoya leaned against the wall, feeling her knees grow weak. "She's a silly old woman. I'll dump her as soon as the hearing is over. The main thing is to get her the sentence she wants. Yes, I know what I'm saying. She's in love like a schoolgirl. Don't worry, just a couple more weeks and it'll be over." Latoya clamped her hand over her mouth to keep from making a sound. Every word hit like a slap in the face. Stupid old woman. Will use. Dumped. She heard Darius laugh, a quiet, mocking laugh that sent a chill down her spine. "All right, I've got to go. She might hear." Latoya had barely made it back to the kitchen when she heard the sound of footsteps. "Can't sleep?" Darius appeared in the kitchen doorway, squinting sleepily. He was wearing only boxers, and now that Latoya was looking at him with new eyes, she saw not an attractive young man, but a predator, cynical and calculating. "Woke up thirsty," she managed to portray a calm smile. "Did the creaking of the floorboards wake you?" "Yes, I'm sensitive," he stretched, showing off a muscular body that had aroused her desire not so long ago, but now only disgust. "Let's go to bed." Darius held out his hand to her. "You have to get up early in the morning." Latoya nodded, accepting his hand. Every touch now felt false, poisoned with lies. But she couldn't show her pain, her rage. Not now. She had to think like a judge, not a betrayed woman. "Come," she smiled, hoping the smile didn't look as strained as it felt. Morning greeted Latoya with a headache and heaviness in her chest. She lay next to Darius, pretending to sleep until he left. Every time he touched her, kissing her goodbye, she forced herself not to flinch. Every time he said, "I love you," she forced herself to believe that the liar wasn't him, but her own ears. When the door closed behind him, Latoya got out of bed. In the bathroom, she stood under the scalding hot shower for a long time, as if trying to wash away Darius's touch, his lies, her naivety. She brushed her teeth with such force that her gums began to bleed. She looked at her reflection in the mirror, the wrinkles around her eyes, the sagging skin of her neck, the gray hair, and saw what Darius saw. A foolish old woman to be manipulated. 65 years old, 30 years of career. A reputation as an impartial, fair judge, all at stake for a fleeting illusion of love, because of a man to whom she meant nothing more than a tool to accomplish a goal. With trembling hands, Latoya opened the medicine cabinet and pulled out a vial of sedative. She swallowed the pill without drinking water, feeling the bitterness on her tongue. In the living room, she began gathering up Darius's things. The t-shirt forgotten on the back of the chair, the book on the coffee table, the phone charger. All of these items, which yesterday had pleased her with their presence because they were part of him, today only made her want to throw them out the window. Latoya stopped, holding his tank top in her hands. Darius's scent still emanated from it, a mixture of expensive cologne and his own unique scent. A scent that had turned her head before, but now only caused her pain. She tossed the tank top into the trash, then changed her mind and pulled it back out. No way to let Darius know she knew anything. Not now. She had to think clearly. Protect herself. Protect her career. And the only way to do that was to act as if nothing had changed until she decided what to do next. In her office, LaToya opened the safe and pulled out Washington's case files, the same ones she'd looked through dozens of times, but now she was looking at them with the eyes of a judge, not a woman in love. Witness testimony that had seemed contradictory before seemed more coherent. The security footage, though grainy, did show a man very similar to Darius. DNA traces on the store counter matching his profile. A new witness willing to swear he'd seen him near the crime scene at the time Darius said he was across town. LaToya remembered the story Darius had told her about his alibi. He'd said he'd visited his mother in the hospital, but no one could confirm it because he hadn't come during visiting hours, and the nurse who'd let him in no longer worked at that hospital. Now this story seemed so far-fetched that LaToya didn't understand how she could believe it. What about the sick mother? LaToya remembered Darius talking about her, the woman who had raised him alone, working 3 jobs, about the woman who was now battling cancer and needed expensive treatment. Did she even exist? Or was this part of his elaborate lie too? LaToya typed Darius's name into the search engine. Never before had she checked him out, trusted his words, trusted his eyes. Stupid, naive. The first few links were about a current case. Then came the social media profiles, which LaToya opened with a mixture of fear and disgust at herself. It was as if she was spying on her own lover. In the Instagram photos, Darius looked just as handsome and confident. Here he is at a party with friends. Here he is on the basketball court. Here he is at the gym showing off his body. Nowhere was there a hint of a sick mother, of financial problems, of struggling to survive in a cruel world. On the contrary, Darius Washington looked like a carefree young man from a well-off family. His last Instagram post was from 3 days ago. Selfies with a beautiful young woman, their faces so close they could have kissed. The caption read, "My queen." LaToya's breath caught. Had he had a girlfriend all this time? Someone his own age, someone he could appear in public with, someone he could be proud of? And she, LaToya, had just been a tool? A convenient tool to manipulate the justice system? She closed the browser, feeling dirty, used, old. All these months she'd been living a lie, an illusion she'd created herself, believing that a young, handsome man could fall in love with a woman 40 years older than him, believing in his sincerity, in his innocence, letting him manipulate her, neglecting her professional responsibilities, risking her career, her reputation, everything she'd spent decades building. The phone rang, snapping LaToya out of her painful musings. It was Chanel. "Are you going to the meeting?" she asked, without greeting. LaToya glanced at her watch. It was an hour before the meeting started, and she was still sitting in her pajamas, unprepared for a new day, let alone court. "Yes, of course," LaToya tried to make her voice sound normal. "You were crying." It wasn't a question. It was a statement. "No." LaToya touched her cheek and was surprised to find it damp with tears. She hadn't even noticed when she started crying. "What's wrong?" Chanel's voice softened. "It's because of him, isn't it?" "I can't talk about it right now." LaToya took a deep breath. "I'll be in court on time." The courtroom was crowded. Journalists, members of the public, relatives of the victims all had come to watch another hearing in the Darius Washington case. The case has become notorious not only because of the personality of the accused, a young man with a seemingly impeccable reputation, but also because of the brutality of the crime. An armed robbery of a store ended in the severe injury of the clerk, an elderly man who was still hospitalized. LaToya Delacroix entered the courtroom with an impenetrable expression. Her long black robe seemed to further emphasize her straight posture and heavy gaze. No one present could guess that beneath this mask of professionalism lurked a woman whose heart had been broken and whose trust had been betrayed. "All rise, the court is in session. The Honorable Judge LaToya Delacroix presiding," announced the bailiff. The rustle of clothes, the creak of chairs. LaToya sat down, looked around the room, lingering her gaze on Darius. He sat at the defense table, dressed in a strict navy blue suit, off-white shirt and modest tie. The perfect image of an innocent young man who had been framed, the image she so desperately wanted to believe in. Continuing the hearing in the state's case against Darius Washington. Her voice sounded flat and cold. District Attorney, are you ready to present new evidence? Marcus Taylor rose from his seat. Yes, Your Honor, the prosecution calls as a witness Leroy Johnson. A tall, middle-aged man in simple work clothes strode to the witness stand. After taking the oath of office, he began his testimony. Mr. Johnson, tell the court what you saw on the evening of October 15th, Marcus asked. I was walking home from work. It was about 9 o'clock at night, Leroy said slowly, choosing his words carefully. I passed Mr. Kim's store. It was about 15 minutes before the robbery. And I saw this young man, he pointed to Darius. He was standing on the corner, as if he were waiting for someone and nervous. Are you sure it was the defendant? Absolutely. I got a good look at him under the streetlight. He was wearing a dark hooded jacket, but his face was uncovered. I also thought that such a decent-looking guy looked odd in our neighborhood. LaToya watched Darius carefully. His face remained calm, but she noticed his fingers tapping nervously on the table. The little gesture, which she had previously found endearing, now seemed like a sign of guilt. Darius's attorney, Jermaine Porter, stood up for cross-examination. Mr. Johnson, you claim to have gotten a good look at my client, but it was 9 o'clock at night, already dark. How can you be so sure? Like I said, he was standing under a streetlight, and I have good eyesight. Had you ever seen my client before this incident? No, never. Then how can you identify with such certainty a man you've only seen for a few seconds in the evening? Objection, Marcus intervened. The defense is trying to confuse the witness. Overruled, LaToya said clearly. Witness, please answer the question. Leroy Johnson straightened up. I memorized his face because he looked out of place, and then when I saw his picture on the news after his arrest, I recognized him immediately. Jermaine continued his questioning, trying to sow doubt about the accuracy of the witness's testimony, but every time Darius looked at LaToya with a mute plea in his eyes, she looked away. Today she was a judge, not a mistress. Today she sought truth, not vindication. After the testimony of 2 more witnesses and the presentation of the DNA test results, LaToya called a recess. We'll continue the session in an hour. She banged her gavel and rose. In her office, LaToya removed her robe and sank heavily into her chair. The headache that had plagued her all morning had intensified. She pulled an aspirin tablet from her desk drawer and swallowed it, drinking cold water from a bottle. A knock on the door made her wince. It was her assistant, a young woman named Tiffany. Your Honor, Mr. Porter, Washington's attorney, is here to see you. LaToya tensed. What did he want? Send him in, she straightened, giving her face an impassive expression. Jermaine Porter entered the office with a concerned look. Your Honor, I'm sorry to intrude, but I wanted to speak to you informally. Mr. Porter, you know the rules. I cannot discuss a case with one party in the absence of the other. LaToya looked coldly at the attorney. I understand, but this isn't about facts. It's about your attitude. Jermaine looked genuinely alarmed. You've always been known for your objectivity, but today, it's as if you've prejudged my client. LaToya felt anger rising inside. Mr. Porter, I will not allow you to question my objectivity. If you have a complaint about my handling of the case, file a formal complaint. Your Honor, I meant no offense. Jermaine held up his hands in a conciliatory gesture. But Darius has noticed a change in your attitude toward him, and he's worried that you believed false testimony. Darius has noticed. Not, my client has noticed. That's odd wording for a lawyer. Did Darius really tell him about their relationship, or was it just a harmless disclaimer? Mr. Porter, I consider all evidence impartially. Now, if you don't mind, I need to prepare to continue the session. As the lawyer left, LaToya closed her eyes. Was Darius really worried? Or was this another manipulation? One thing she knew for sure was that her attitude had truly changed. She now saw the evidence in its true light, without the rose-colored glasses of love and trust. As she returned to the courtroom, LaToya could feel Darius's intense gaze on her. He looked at her with concern and bewilderment, as if he didn't understand what had happened. Why had his charms stopped working? The session continued with the presentation of the latest evidence: surveillance footage, technical examination of the weapon, forensic testimony. Everything pointed to Darius's guilt, and Latoya no longer looked for contradictions in the evidence. She saw them for what they were. When the hearing was over, Latoya announced, "In light of the new evidence and a comprehensive evaluation of all the circumstances of the case, the court decides to extend the bail measure. The next hearing will take place on Monday, where the parties' closing arguments will be presented. This session is hereby adjourned." Darius looked shocked. He leaned toward his attorney, whispering something fervently. Jermaine shook his head and then walked over to the prosecutor's table, where he entered into conversation with Marcus Taylor. Latoya gathered her papers and headed for the exit. In the hallway, Chanel caught up with her. "What's been going on with you today?" she asked, taking Latoya aside. "You were different." "I was a judge," Latoya replied simply. "Nothing more." "You learned something, didn't you?" Chanel scrutinized her face. "What did he do?" Latoya felt tears stinging her eyes, but she didn't let them spill. "Not here, Chanel. I'll call you tonight." Chanel squeezed her hand tightly and nodded. "Take care of yourself, Latoya. Whatever happens, I'm with you." Latoya smiled gratefully and walked toward her office. She needed to prepare for one more test, her final meeting with Darius. That evening in her apartment, Latoya waited for Darius. She knew he would come after her attitude in court. After she had practically made it clear that she didn't believe in his innocence, he was bound to show up, to try to regain his power over her, to convince her again. She sat in the living room, staring at the rain outside the window. There were 2 glasses and a bottle of red wine on the coffee table. A fire crackled in the fireplace, giving the illusion of coziness and warmth. Everything was as it usually was when they spent evenings together. Everything except for one thing, her heart. It no longer beat faster at the thought of him. It was cold and hard as stone. The doorbell rang at 8 sharp. Latoya took a deep breath and went to open it. Darius stood on the doorstep, drenched from the rain, with a strained expression on his face. "What's going on, Latoya?" he asked, not waiting for an invitation to enter. "What happened in court today?" "Come in." She stepped back, letting him pass. "This is going to be a long conversation." Darius entered the apartment, removing his wet jacket as he went. His movements were nervous, abrupt, not at all like his usual gracefulness. "You haven't answered my texts all day," he turned to her. "It's like you've become a different person." "I'm not the one who's changed, Darius." Latoya walked past him into the living room. "It's just that I've finally seen the truth." She sat down on the couch and pointed to the chair across from him. Darius slowly lowered himself into it, keeping his eyes on her. "What are you talking about?" "I heard you talking on the phone." Latoya looked him straight in the eye. "Last night, when you thought I was asleep." Darius stiffened but quickly mastered himself. A look of bewilderment appeared on his face. "What conversation? I don't know what you mean." His voice sounded confused, but his eyes betrayed anxiety. Latoya gave an unfunny chuckle. "Don't continue this game, Darius. I've heard enough. She's a silly old woman. I'll dump her as soon as the hearings are over." "Am I quoting correctly?" Darius's face changed. The mask of bewilderment slid away, giving way to cold calculation. "And what are you going to do? Accuse me of manipulating you? But you're the one who broke the law by sleeping with the defendant." Latoya felt a chill of fear run down her spine. Now she saw the real him, not the handsome, gentle lover, but the cold-blooded manipulator. "I'm not afraid of you." Her voice sounded firmer than she felt. "Yes, I made a mistake, letting my feelings cloud my judgment, but it won't happen again." "What exactly won't happen again, Latoya?" Darius pitched forward. "Our meetings, or your attempt to help me?" "Our affair is over." Latoya looked him straight in the eye. "And I will handle your case impartially, as I should have from the beginning." Darius stood up abruptly, his face contorted with anger. "After everything that has happened between us, after all my words, my vows, you're just going to redraw that over some conversation you may have misunderstood? Don't insult me further." Latoya stood up as well. "I did get it right. You used me to get away with it. You played on my feelings, on my loneliness. But now, I see right through you." Darius took a step toward her, his face softening. "Latoya, please. Let's talk calmly. I can explain that conversation. There's nothing to explain. Latoya stepped back, increasing the distance between them. I saw your Instagram. You're queen. You had a girlfriend all this time, didn't you? And I was just a convenient tool? Something flashed in Darius's eyes. Surprise? Fear? But he quickly mastered himself. It's not what you think. That girl is just a friend. You're the one woman I love. Love? Latoya laughed bitterly. You don't even know the meaning of the word. Love is not lies or manipulation. Darius stepped close to her, taking her by the shoulders. Look me in the eyes and tell me you don't feel anything for me anymore. Latoya looked into his eyes, dark, deep, so beautiful, and saw only calculation in them. I feel nothing but pity for you, she said quietly. And I'm asking you to leave. Something changed in his gaze. Something dark and dangerous flashed in the depths of his pupils. You can't leave me. His fingers dug painfully into her shoulders. Not now. Not when my future depends on you. Let go, Latoya tried to break free. You're only making things worse. Worse. Darius laughed, but there was no mirth in his laughter. What could be worse than ending up in jail for a crime I didn't commit? Stop lying, Latoya shouted. I've seen the evidence. Your DNA at the crime scene. The witnesses who saw you there. You're guilty, Darius, and you know it. His face contorted with rage. In one sharp motion, he shoved her, and Latoya fell to the couch. I'm not going to prison, he muttered through gritted teeth. Not because of you. Not because of some stupid salesman who didn't want to give up his money. There it was. The confession. Latoya stared at him, and the last shreds of doubt vanished. So it's true, she rose slowly. You really did commit a robbery. And you thought I was innocent? Darius grinned. You wanted to believe it so badly that you overlooked the obvious evidence? How naive you were, Latoya. He walked over to the coffee table, poured wine into a glass, and drank in a volley. You know what the funny thing is? I didn't even plan on using you. Not in the beginning. But when I saw the way you looked at me in the courtroom with that kind of hunger, I knew this was my chance. Every word he said was like a blow. Latoya could feel something dying inside her, but outwardly remained calm. Get out of my house. Her voice was quiet but determined. Now, and on Monday, I'll make sure you get the maximum sentence. Darius turned toward her, madness splashing in his eyes. Don't you understand? I can't walk away. Not now. Not when you know the truth. Not now that you're threatening to send me to prison for 20 years. Latoya felt fear, real, primal fear. She crept toward the door. If you don't leave immediately, I'll call the police. And what will you tell them? Darius took a step toward her. That you slept with the defendant? That you violated the law and professional ethics? That you compromised the entire case with your behavior? He was right. She couldn't call the police without jeopardizing her career, her reputation, her entire life. I won't let you blackmail me. Latoya tried to speak firmly, but her voice shook. No matter what you do, I will not change my mind. Darius grabbed an empty glass from the table and clenched it in his hand with force. The glass cracked, and sharp shards dug into his palm. Blood dripped onto the carpet, but he didn't seem to notice the pain. You're ruining my life, he whispered. After everything I've done for you. After all the nights I spent with you, pretending I didn't hate touching your old body. Latoya flinched as if slapped. Get out! She pointed at the door. Now! Instead of answering, Darius lunged at her with a shard of glass in his hand. The movement was so swift that Latoya didn't have time to react. She felt a sharp pain in her neck, and then warm moisture running down her skin. Darius looked at her with an expression of wild satisfaction as she fell to her knees, clasping the wound with her hand. Blood seeped between her fingers, drenching her white blouse. You left me no choice, he said, watching the life slowly leave her. It was your own fault. Latoya tried to speak, but only wheezing and blood came out of her mouth. She could feel her strength leaving her as the world around her went dark. The last thing she saw was Darius's face, beautiful, young, distorted with rage. The face of the man she loved, the man who had killed her. Darius stared at Latoya's body spread out on the living room floor. Blood was spreading across the expensive carpet, creating a dark puddle. Her eyes were open but lifeless, staring into the void. Panic began to rise within him. What had he done? He hadn't planned to kill her. He just wanted to scare her, to silence her, to make her continue to help him. But now he was a killer. Darius looked around, trying to gather his thoughts. He had to cover his tracks, had to escape before anyone discovered the body. First, he took off his bloody shirt and threw it into the fireplace. The flames immediately engulfed the fabric, destroying the evidence. Then he made his way to the bathroom and washed his hands and face thoroughly, wiping away all traces of blood. In Latoya's bedroom, he found her wallet. Inside was some cash and plastic cards. He took the money. He would need the funds to escape. Then he returned to the living room and looked around for other clues. His gaze fell on Latoya's cell phone lying on the table. He picked it up, unlocked it, and checked the messages. There was a long conversation with Chanel. Latoya had told her friend about the overheard conversation, about her suspicions. It was bad. Very bad. Darius deleted those messages, hoping no one could recover them. Then he texted a quick message to Chanel from Latoya's phone. "I'm sorry about the conversation today. I need to be alone. Talk to you Monday." That should have gotten him in shape, at least until the work week started. He'd be long gone by then. Darius looked around the apartment one more time, checking to see if he'd left any traces. Then he put on the clean jacket he always kept in Latoya's closet and headed for the door. On the threshold, he turned around, casting one last glance at the body of the woman who had loved him, who had trusted him, who he had used and killed. There was no remorse, only cold calculation and thoughts of his own salvation. Darius quietly closed the door behind him and disappeared into the night, leaving behind a pool of blood and a shattered life. The first rays of the winter sun were barely breaking through the clouds when Chanel Fremont stopped her car outside an elegant apartment complex on the Gold Coast. She had spent a sleepless night, unable to find peace after last night's short message from Latoya. Something about the message seemed wrong. Not like her friend's usual style, Chanel tried to call back, but Latoya's phone was off. 3 times already in her long career as a lawyer, Chanel had woken up with such an oppressive premonition, and each time it had been justified. She'd learned to trust her intuition. The doorman recognized her and nodded respectfully. Chanel was a frequent visitor here, a regular at Latoya's house. "Good morning, Mrs. Fremont. Judge Delacroix hasn't been out yet today." "Thank you, George. I'll go up to see her." In the elevator, Chanel tapped her foot nervously, looking at the floor numbers. 32, 33, 34. Why so slow? She pulled out her phone and checked her messages again. Nothing new from Latoya. In front of the apartment door, Chanel paused, then resolutely pressed the bell. Silence. She rang the bell again, then knocked. "Latoya? It's Chanel. Are you home?" No answer. Anxiety was building. Chanel pulled a key out of her purse. Latoya had once insisted her friend have access to her apartment in case of an emergency. "I'm 65, Chanel. Who knows when I might need help?" she said then with a bitter chuckle. Chanel turned the key in the lock and cautiously opened the door. "Latoya, it's me. I apologize for the intrusion, but I'm helpless." The words stuck in her throat. In the living room, right on the floor, lay Latoya. Her white blouse was soaked with dark red blood that had already dried to form a brown stain. Latoya's eyes were open but lifeless, staring up at the ceiling. "Oh God, no, no, no!" Chanel rushed to her friend, falling to her knees beside the body. She knew it was too late, but she put trembling fingers to Latoya's neck anyway, searching for a pulse. The skin was cold to the touch. No pulse, no breathing. Chanel sat on the floor, unable to take her eyes off the face of the woman she'd known for over 30 years. Tears ran down her cheeks, dripping onto the expensive carpet already soaked with blood. Grief came over her like a heavy wave, flooding her mind. She wrapped her arms around Latoya's body, cradling it like a child, and howled softly in pain and rage.